Hi, good evening, everybody. Uh, Thank you for joining us. This is the final of our webinar series under the collaboration with IIHS Library and Mihir Kulkarni of the School of Environment and Sustainability at IIHS and the Bengaluru Sustainability Forum. We've been doing a collaboration for the last 3 months since October, a library exhibition on urban ecology. And in addition to a few in-person sessions that we've had and a curation of books and research papers at the library, we've been trying to curate this, series of webinars. And today we're very happy to have Nivedita Tuli with us. Nivedita currently works with the Hyderabad Urban Lab Foundation. She's an ecologist and an educator and is currently heading a new urban ecology and nature program for the Hyderabad Urban Lab Foundation called Project Critterabad, which the name itself is quite interesting and says a lot. And prior to working here, Nivedita was with the bureaucracy, working with the forest bureaucracy at the state and central level in Delhi. And today's webinar is focusing on her work and her research from those 3 years. So yeah, thank you, Nivedita, and we look forward to a really interesting session with you.
Thank you. So the title of my talk is Vilayati keekar, the making of an invasive species. So Vilayati means foreign and keekar is a term used to refer to thorny acacias in Delhi. And this talk is framed as like a backstory, You talk about Batman, but then there was a movie on Joker. So here, as an urban ecologist, I want to take you to the story of this much vilified species, the Vilayati keekar, and share some of the lessons I have learned working in the margins of urban ecology. So, becoming an urban ecologist, I'm not a native myself. My family migrated during the 1947 partition to what is now India from the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region, the mountains of northern Pakistan now. As a kid, I didn't really have access to wild nature, but my dad took me to local parks, and that is where I learned to understand critters, identify plants and bugs. I studied communications and history for my bachelor's from the University of Delhi, and then followed it up with a master's from the School of Human Ecology at Ambedkar University. I finished my master's in 2020 and there was a dearth of job opportunities. So I landed up working with the forest department as an associate with the Delhi Ridges Management Board. So I landed up back in the Ridge, the place where my nanny's family had camped out as partition refugees. And there in the forest, I walked and I learned how to identify the species and the rhythms and the politics of an urban forest. So this work draws on what is called a multi-species ethnography, which means that it's not just an ethnography of people. It's about the non-human characters that make up this crazy forest as well. So walking attentively in a forest, even a damaged one, is to be caught by the abundance of life. But how does one tell the life of the forest? Well, we begin to look for drama and adventure beyond the life of humans, but we're not used to reading stories without human heroes. And I decided, can I show the landscape as a protagonist of an adventure in which I was just one kind of participant? So here's the species Prosopis juliflora, Mimosa subfamily, all the typical details, twice feathered leaves and flat and curved pods, twisted dark main branches and a spreading canopy. But then I found myself at the forefront of this very unexpected war because everybody was talking about uprooting the species, which here seems rather innocuous. And suddenly, Delhi is fighting against this Mexican colonist and it's trying to weed it out and kill it and reduce its monopoly. So, what was going on? This talk is an attempt to complicate We are going to complicate the Vilayati keekar and learn how an invasive species comes to be. And let us think today about the journey of this tree across the globe, about how we can use the urban in Delhi to make sense of things happening all around the globe. Let's think about how plants walk, and with them, meanings, ideas, and gene pools travel, and about borders. As a partition grandkid, I love thinking about borders and about how bodies, human and non human, acquire meanings as they cross these borders. So, what is an invasive species? Academic literature has no consensus, so I'm going to use the National Geographic Encyclopedia to tell you it's an organism that is not native to a particular area and can cause great economic, environmental, or both kinds of harm to the new area. You'd be interested to know that a cat is invasive, a catfish is invasive, and of course, our dear Prosopis juliflora is invasive. It's characterized as invasive. Because the reason why there's no universal definition is because a lot of terms we use in invasion science include qualities that are open to emotive interpretation, like exotic, weed, naturalized. Invasion science is the study of the causes and consequences of species spreading haywire. And researchers draw not only from ecology and biology, but also from history and geography, epidemiology, paleontology, economics to understand biological invasions. So let's get a little sciencey for 5 minutes. How does a species become invasive? Why will a particular species become invasive? Well, there are certain theories, and I'm going to quickly give you the references and take you through them. The first is the fluctuating resource theory. This means that a plant community is going to become vulnerable to invasion if there is if there are unused resources available, right? So invading species, like any other species, also need sunlight, water, and nutrients. So if these resources are available, they'll face reduced competition from native species. So extra resources can be created in different ways. For instance, resource uptake may fall, supply of resources may increase, and resource supply can both increase and the uptake can decrease. So I invite you to get into the literature, later. But so the other one is quite a simple one: enemy release theory. It means that all plants and animals will have predators, right? Predators or herbivores. But what if you land up in a new land and the predators aren't there? Of course, you're going to flourish, right? So this is one of the reasons why certain species become to proliferate and go haywire. Like the St. John's wort in North America. It didn't have the herbivore beetle, and that is why it was becoming invasive. And then conservationists brought the St. John wort beetle, and the population was handled out. And the last theory, it draws from all the different theories and it talks about ecological niches. A niche is the position I or any organism has in its environment. So then the niche opportunity theory sees invasions as a product of having extra resources and less enemies, and the interactions among all these factors creates an opportunity, which is where the invasive will go and sit. Which means, quite simply, is that if you have an intact ecosystem, then it is very less likely that an invasive will just stealthily come and creep up and remove species. It's when there is a gap, it is when there is an opening that invasion happens. So there is a simple relationship between the number of natives and the number of exotics at different spatial scales. It's broadly a positive relationship, which means that if there are a large number of native species, it also means that there is favorable soil and climate. So the same things which make a region biodiversity rich also make it more suitable for exotic species. There is but at the local level, we see negative relationships. So if resources are not being effectively utilized, there are empty niches, then that empty niche can be filled by a non-native species, which is what would make it invasive. There's a simple 10% rule, which means that if there are 1,000 species that are introduced, only 10 are going to become invasive. So not all non-natives are likely to spread chaos, are not likely to proliferate. There are certain characteristics which would make a species more likely to be invasive, like greater reproductive potential, better dispersal ability, long seed viability. And there's something called polyploidy, which means that the species is more adaptable. Okay, so if a species is able to multiply fast, disperse more quickly, the seeds last longer, then of course it is more likely to be invasive than others which do not have these characteristics. So now let's take a detour from the invasion science and look at the Delhi Ridge. Okay, the Delhi Ridge is an urban forest. It is the northernmost extension of the rocky Aravallis, which pass through Rajasthan and Gujarat and Haryana before entering Delhi from the south near Gurgaon, and they traverse the city in a northeasterly direction before culminating. Uh, the soil is thin, poor in moisture, and it is best suited to support an open canopy thorn forest, meaning that it is never supposed to be a jungle, it's never supposed to be a rich forest. It is always supposed to be a dry, open canopied scrub land. It has been divided into 4 administrative sessions, which are northern, central, south central, and southern. And the section of the ridge where I worked and lived while working with the forest department was the central ridge, which touches the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and thus, of course, it's least accessible to the public. This is the Rashtrapati Bhavan, which was designed during the making of New Delhi as the Viceroy's Palace. The first time I came across the keekar was in this book, very famous field guide, Pradeep Krishan's Trees of Death. And I was scared because Pradeep Krishan wrote about how Vilayati keekar had begun to dominate Delhi's flora. And he called it the principal cause for a number of native species edging towards local extinction. And he said that Delhi had paid a high price for its introduction. So it was spooky. And fun anecdote, I was in my bachelor's and my environmental science professor took us on a tree walk. And all the trees were labeled. And there was this black, gnarly tree. And they had not labeled it at all. And I was like, what is this? And sir was like, this is an invasive, okay? Hush, we're not going to talk much about it. We're not going to label it. It's a bad. So it was scary. And as a 19-year-old, I made a student documentary called Green Gone Wrong because I was really scared of this invasive species and what it was doing to Delhi. How did the keekar come to Delhi, by the way? It had not proliferated in a vibrant, teeming forest. What had happened is 9 villages grazing land was acquired during the making of New Delhi, and the Indian Forest Act was applied for the first time in Delhi to fence out these villages and create this beautiful supposed backdrop, this colorful aesthetic for New Delhi, the Viceroy's Palace. So this was when the Prosopis juliflora was one of the species that was introduced into the Delhi ridge. So it was an afforestation effort which brought the species here to begin with. So the tree is comprising the perennial. So it had always, okay, so Prosopis juliflora, I began investigating of it. And I realized that not all literature spoke like Pradeep Krishan did. J.K. Maheshwari, for instance, working in the 1950s and publishing in 1960s, wrote about the Prosopis juliflora innocuously. He was like, okay, it's a evergreen spiny tree. It's native to Mexico and Central America. It's common on the ridge. It's part and parcel of the native flora. So you see the difference in discourse. This boogeyman, as we see now, was just called a part and parcel of a native flora. And then this really cool book made by the citizens, a citizens group called Cultivate, published in 1991, said that, okay, there are, along with the native plants in the Delhi Ridge, we have a bunch of introduced trees and shrubs that have become naturalized. And most common is Kabuli keekar. So it wasn't known as Vilayati or foreign keekar at that point of time. It was just called the Kabuli keekar. And it was called naturalized. So not invasive, it was called naturalized. And it was said that, okay, it looks very similar to the plants that we have in the ridge anyway. The cover, for that matter, of Kalpavriksh's book, which was also the first slide of my presentation, was the Vilayati keekar. But drawing from what environmentalists and early invasion science had been talking about, the Delhi High Court began reacting. And so crazy things began to happen. Like there was this 2019 landmark judgment in a drug patent case, wherein after this judgment, crores and crores of rupees began to be diverted towards plantations in the Central Ridge Forest. And you know how it was justified? It was justified by saying that the Central Ridge is covered by Vilayati keekar and the tree is foreign. It is not a native tree. And it has origins in Mexico and it quietly spreads over a large area and it gives impression of a green cover, but it provides no real shade or carbon absorption. So using this, what came to be created was Insaf Bagh, this wacky garden of justice inside a forest. So all of a sudden, it was declared that this scrubland, this very thin soil, this rocky undulating ridge must always be green, and Prosopis juliflora was not green enough, even though it is being called an evergreen tree and it has been called a naturalized species earlier. All of a sudden, it only gives you an impression of a green cover. It's a fake green cover now. And this area will always have to be green and keekar has to be removed. So let us spend a bunch of money and let us use this bunch of money to plant trees in a forest and call it a bagh of justice. A bagh is a garden. So a manicured garden in the middle of the forest using the Vilayati keekar narrative. So these bunch of broadleaf species, which are not, so there was a list of 20 species, and these species were not necessarily, non-native, but they were definitely not suited to the ridge ecosystem. Bunch of pipes, underground water was pumped out to plant these closely spaced, broad-leaved species. And the contractor would tell me that, garmi mein paudhe mar jate hain, ma'am. The summer kills the plants. And then a lot of other species were pruned and cut down in the name of the keekar, because isn't this also keekar, madam? They told me. But no, Prosopis juliflora looked like Vachellia liquifolia. It looked like Dicrosatis cinerea. Vachellia nilotica, Senegalia modesta, Senegalia senegal. How was a layman supposed to tell which was a keekar? And all of this was cut and all of this was wiped out in the name of the boogeyman, which is our Vilayati keekar. And so this forest was full of these plantations. Merk Sharp, the Merk Sharp judgment, Merk Sharp and Dom became Mark Sahab. Okay, Mark Sahab's plantations proliferated. And my boss told me when the broadleaf plantations began to fail, the DCF, he told me and my co-workers to go and prove that the plantations were failing due to the keekar. So we were asked to collect data, to formulate data so that the court could be told that, the reason why the plantations are failing, it's not because this landscape was never meant to be forested. Oh no, it's because of the keekar. So that's what was shouted at us. And of course, everybody else was telling me that the ridge is full of keekar, we need to fix it. But as I was working and living in the forest, I was falling more and more in love with it. And I knew that it was not just full of keekar. And all of this was being sacrificed in the name of all these different afforestation efforts that were happening. And my beautiful forest was being sacrificed. The forest that we all really loved. And in the middle, it was just nobody was noticing the critters there. Nobody was noticing anything else. It was just this bad forest full of this bad tree which had to be fixed. And at the same time, I was keeping up with my research. My master's supervisor from the School of Human Ecology published this amazing paper which showed that in using network analysis, that invasives were actually coexisting with natives in the ridge. And in fact, it was the invasive, supposedly, which were not coexisting together. And the paper was showing that there were new and stable associations in the Delhi ridge. And then there were more papers like Nordial et al. In tropical ecology, which showed that Prosopis juliflora was actually acting as a nurse tree, facilitating regeneration of native species. So I was so confused. I was so confused with the different discourses which were suddenly around me. And I was in the middle of this crazy war and just trying to read and experience the forest and walk and figure out what was going on. And then I tried to make sense of it. And I realized that the latest research in advanced ecology disproves a lot of this vilification. It shows that it has been increasingly observed that the changes experienced by ecosystems are too far from the historical versions, and that by reverting to the same composition and function is kind of impossible. In such a scenario, is it feasible to hold on to past ecosystems? The resources required to maintain ecosystems in the former states may be too high. And then what is the incentive of forcing ecosystems back in time? It makes more sense to appraise ecosystems and their functioning before setting goals for restoration projects. We need to question our nostalgia and ask why? Why are we trying to take an ecosystem back in time? So this influential paper by Hobbs et al. Showed that um, an ecosystem might have become a hybrid or completely a novel association. A novel association meaning that um, it might have very few or none of the species originally existing, but it might still be thermodynamically feasible. It might still be, supporting human and non-human life. So the same way in which this Prosopis laden ecosystem, which also had a bunch of other native species, was supporting all these critters, shouldn't we be relying on natural regeneration and supporting the ecosystem that had been created rather than wiping out a bunch of things in pursuit of this pristine landscape? And so again, I came across Beyond the War on Invasives by Tao Orion, and I found myself again on the front lines of an unexpected war. And then Tao writes about how invasive species also have stories to tell and information to offer. Like those of us who don't have a homeland in what is India today, we also have stories to tell. We still might contribute to the ecosystem and the spaces around us, even though we are not from here. And so instead of inciting fear and frustration, can we come to see the presence of invasives as an exciting opportunity to engage with the land deeper and in more meaningful ways? And there's this really lovely book by Banu Subramaniam called Botany of Empire that talks about the colonial scientific legacies that shape botany to this day. And Banu writes that I believe that the xenophobic responses to foreign animals, humans, and plants are related. When anthropocentric concepts are transferred into plant worlds, botany becomes a site that reinforces the normal and natural. And we need to challenge native and foreign as labels for both humans and plants. We need more vocabularies and new stories to narrate life on Earth. And then I left the forest department and landed up in Hyderabad last year. And I landed up with my mentor and supervisor, Dr. Anant Maringanti, on a floating trash collector in the Mir Alam tank, which is a water body in Hyderabad. And the Hyderabad government, like many state governments, has been trying to remove this species called the water hyacinth, which is also characterized as invasive. And as we were cutting through the water hyacinth and creating openings in the water, we were noticing a lot of birds and a lot of like a lot of egrets and swallows and drones seeming very frustrated and freaked out. And I realized that this was also in a way a forest and ecosystem that we were disturbing. Um because even damaged and battered as these lakes are today, they are supporting a novel network of human and non-human life. Like the thick canopy on water hyacinths supports a multitude of insects, which in turn support a multitude of birds. And the plants have grown tall and dense over the years and sequester huge volumes of greenhouse gases. They also intake heavy metals and other pollutants, reducing the pollution in the lake. And they contribute to the health and well being of people residing nearby because the insects nestled among the leaves consume mosquitoes and keep diseases at bay. And when in bloom, the hyacinths are a sight to behold. When a lot of Hyderabadis remember strolling through the lakes and enjoying the purple backdrop of the flowers. But the state government doesn't think so. The state government is spending crores and crores to remove the water hyacinth rather than addressing the actual causes of the degradation of the water body. Much like the state government in Delhi, which is spending so much money, and the court is spending so much money trying to remove Prosopis triliflora instead of actually paying attention to the different ways in which the ecosystem is being degraded. Large swaths are being carved out. The attention is on these capital intensive things like planting and removing of invasives. So clearly, the mission to eliminate these species is less rooted in environmental considerations and more about imposing a certain aesthetic, a blue aesthetic on Hyderabad's lakes and a green aesthetic on the central ridge ecosystem. These species, the water hyacinth and Prosopis juliflora, have become scapegoated as the causes of ecological degradation, while they're actually symptoms of larger processes, larger degradation. But the government bodies choose to overlook the actual sources of the crisis. So, at the end of this talk, I have taken you through my journey through the Central Ridge and through certain borders and binaries. And my journey has taken me a few inches ahead in my understanding. From a girl who was making a documentary called Green Gone Wrong, today I am an advocate of questioning the ways in which we seek to eliminate invasives and weeds. And so I'm not here to share definitive solutions. What I bring to you, what I've brought to you is my story. And the story of Vilayati keekar and water hyacinth is also my story. And my story is about cultivating an art of noticing, to pause and observe rather than just zoom through ecosystems and impose theory. Can we pause and take a look before we seek to reshape them? It's about kinder and gentler and more nuanced ways of engaging with the critters around us. Which brings me to the work I'm doing today with Hyderabad Urban Lab. Um, this is a project very dear to my heart because Hyderabad is an arid ecosystem like Delhi, and I'm taking the insights I've learned from Delhi and documenting and educating people about learning. So, to conclude, I would say that um, the story of how urbanization and capitalism has destroyed our ecosystems is something we are all familiar with. But what next? Let us look at the mushroom under the cloud of capitalist ruins and let us learn to keep our eyes open, cultivate the art of noticing. And it is only by observing and valuing what remains and building an ecological identity around it that we can become true advocates to preserve urban ecosystems. So, yeah, I hope that my story helped you all. And I'm still learning, so I'm not being prescriptive. And thank you so much for listening.
Thanks a lot, Nivedita. Uh, I'd request all of you who have questions to enter it in the Q&A box. Uh, Before we get to those, I think, Nivedita, some of the things that you brought up are quite interesting in terms of, this whole series of webinars that we've been looking at. The premise is that urban ecology is an emerging field, and it is not just pristine forests that one looks at or should think of when we're looking at urban ecology. And so your whole point of, do we look at it as an opportunity? Do we look at the novel kind of ecosystems and relationships that are being formed? And what role does policy play, right, in something like this? Can it play a role, and what role has it played so far from your experience? Uh, I thought that would be interesting to understand in terms of policy, and what kind of role do you think it can play in a situation like this? Uh, so policy on the one hand, citizens on the other hand, and who are the other stakeholders that one is missing out on, right, in this whole understanding that we currently have?
Mhm. Um, my larger project on the Central Ridge, I looked at all the various stakeholders that led to the making of this garden of justice, and um, I think there is a need for a bit of a less rush. Like in this case, the court ordered these mass plantations very quickly. The lists of the species kept changing because even the court realized that they were dying out, and then moreover, these species, even if they decided to put native species in the list, do we have the nurseries that can actually supply native plants? So let us say that the court had put not broadleaf species, but native species of this ecosystem in the list. Do we have the capacity to uh, do mass plantations of native species? Shouldn't money be funneled into building stronger institutional capacities with the forest department and beyond to facilitate uh, regeneration of our forests? Instead, what we do is we greenwash with plantations, and um, there is a need to do longer work and also long-term ecological observatories. Like now, the policymakers are hiring folks like me on contract. What happens with that is that institutional memory is lost. I have learned so much, my colleagues learned so much, but there's no long-term database. And we really, we really need people, young people, to be embedded in these institutions in a respectful manner for a longer period of time so we can actually work on these things.
Right. There is a question which says, you have shared so much of positive impacts of water hyacinth, but they are still being eradicated. So what is the lack of, or the knowledge gap that still remains? And on the one hand, while like you're saying, where we need to not rush into fixing or finding solutions immediately, but look at the big picture, look at the long term and a time scale over perhaps several years, right, before one arrives at a quick fix. So question is, what is that knowledge gap in terms of understanding these species, perhaps?
is that we are not addressing the root causes of why these lakes are polluted. Um, the Mir Alam tank and all the water bodies in Hyderabad, for instance, sewage water is being diverted to them, causing eutrophication and heavy metal toxicity and a whole bunch of things. Um, but the focus then is on this blue aesthetics. So there is this rule by aesthetics which is being created in the sense that the visuals are being prioritized over ecological considerations. So it is only when we let go, because like in the Delhi Ridge as well, I feel like there is this push to make a green evergreen forest, right? And if we let go of that imagination and learn more about what that ecosystem is supposed to be, probably it's not supposed to be blue or green, it's supposed to be somewhere in between. And then when we go with this modest understanding, which the bureaucracy often doesn't. Like my experience with the bureaucracy is that um, they prioritize visuals over quick visuals, which before and after photos over detailed work. An order will come on from the top, and then quickly everybody would scramble, and then quickly everybody would forget. So, as citizens, we need to advocate for nuanced things and push for uh, diversity beyond the blue and green. Um, that would be quite lovely. And then address the sources of the pollution, because it's not uh, it's not whether the water hyacinth and Prosopis juliflora are very good and they're perfect. It's not like that. They are mixed bunches which have a mixed bunch of impacts on the ecosystems. Uh, but are they the mortal enemy? Are they what we should prioritize? Is the fight against Prosopis juliflora or water hyacinth, or should the fight be against what we are doing to these ecosystems by pumping sewage and chopping trees? Let's take the fight to closer home rather than to these species that we brought in, right? Water hyacinth was brought during the colonial period by human beings, and Vilayati keekar as well. So,
Right. So there is a question that's saying that the water hyacinth is believed ecologically also to have a detrimental effect on aquatic life and the ecology of the lakes. So, what is that, that balance that we need to arrive at, perhaps, where one can leave it and look at the life that it is supporting. At the same time, it is known or it is studied to be to have a detrimental effect on aquatic life. So, how does one arrive at something like that?
so again with the water hyacinth, um, so so again with the water hyacinth, the Mir Alam tank, for instance, it has like no fish. And that's not because of the water hyacinth. It is because the Mir Alam tank in Hyderabad has no fish, not because of the water hyacinth, but because of the fact that sewage is being pumped into the water, right? So let's address that rather than, because the water hyacinth is also keeping a lot of things at bay. Had the ecosystem, the Central Ridge was never a teeming rainforest, and the Miralam tank was not. So let's be a little more realistic again about not glamorizing the invasive species, but let's focus on sources of degradation first. Because a lot gets wiped out, right? Like that's what the Central Ridge work also showed, that mm, in the name of keekar, a bunch of our gorgeous, lovely mimosas get wiped out. So there's always a risk. And Tao Orion writes in Beyond the War on Invasives about fire being used to remove invasive species and the little frogs that were charred to death in the process. So, can we be humane and kinder and gentler? Is the point. It's not to embrace and love the invasive species, but we have to treat the ecosystem more gently. You can't throw things on it.
There are two questions here on, and both refer to the lantana, Nivedita. One is talking about, is it okay to overlook all invasive species like lantana, for example? And I'll just quickly read the second question, also referring to the lantana. Do you have any insights on lantana or Congress grass, which are termed one of the primary reasons for fueling mass wildfires in the mountains of Uttarakhand? So I think the question is, you know, and it would perhaps go back to, but I'd let you answer that. Like the Prosopis juliflora and the water hyacinth, we've all heard a lot about the lantana, as well as the Parthenium plant, right? So how does one really approach? So on the one hand, you were talking about it, taking a more, looking at it as a life form, taking a more humane approach, looking at what it is bringing in, rather than only what it is causing or killing, as many people believe that it's wiping out other species. So yeah, so do you have anything to add in terms of the lantana? And because in Karnataka and peri-urban areas of Bangalore, lantana is seen as a plant that is taking over a lot of the native species. There has been some amount of work, on looking at using lantana for making secondary materials or other, products. So what is your take on approaches like that?
Again, lantana, of course, is a deeply problematic species. Crazy stuff, like you'll find it on isolated islands and wacky things. There are methods to remove lantana, and it has been successful. Um, but but again, like like with any other thing, we have to take a context specific approach, right? Prosopis juliflora might be wreaking, like Prosopis juliflora is also native to somewhere. It's a naturalized species somewhere, and it's uh, wreaking havoc somewhere. So I would not like to be prescriptive at this stage in my work, and I would like to say, look at the context, observe, practice the art of observing, see what's actually going on. You learn a lot, and then apply that and read up, and just don't throw a solution from one landscape into another landscape, and I'm sure it'll be figured out.
This is something that I also wanted to ask you. Someone has shared similar to your answer regarding the role of policy in a world where projects seem to need a quick execution by the people in power. What can we as residents do to ensure there is a process of consideration? Raising voices seems to slow down the process, sure, but how can we organize ourselves to intervene and be involved in decisions made for our city?
As you can see, with all the complexities of the book, Pradeep Krishan's field guide, Trees of Delhi, has been influential in training non-science people like me and a bunch of us, right? So it's not like these records and interventions don't make a difference, they do. Personally, I believe that building an ecological identity from the ground up is the only way to deal with what is going on, in the sense that city dwellers are all often nature blind because they have not seen wild spaces as much. So when you don't have access to wild spaces, a dam becomes something regrettable, and cutting of trees becomes meh. I think it's sad, but I don't really care. So if we actually set up reading groups, if we actually network around ecosystems, read a bunch together, watch a bunch together, then like Hyderabad Urban Lab does, we end up meeting a lot of different stakeholders, liaisoning with policymakers. If you come together, then there are ways to navigate these things because policymakers are increasingly willing to take a listen. But we need to come together and get a bunch of people together, and ecological identity at the core. Wherever you live, wherever you are, build an ecological identity among the people, especially children, which is why I got away from the allure of academia and started educating kids because you can write as many papers as you want, but if you teach a kid to care about a bug, then you have created a cohort of people who are going to advocate for things, and many of them are going to be policymakers themselves.
There's a request for you to stop sharing screen so that we can see yours video live, full screen. Yeah. There's a question here, Nivedita. It's a little long. I'm going to read it out to you. It is natural that when formerly Vilayati species establish themselves for an extended period of time in an ecosystem, they will develop strong interlinkages with different actors in the ecosystem. So removing them will impose new stresses on the ecosystem as it has evolved. This relates to your point that we should accept ecosystems in their novel state. Nevertheless, the continuing presence of the invasive species can negatively affect many others. Is there any concisely formulated or objective way to decide whether and when one should try to intervene in the evolving dynamics of the ecosystem as it relates to its health? Or should we simply respect nature as she evolves? There is a comment to it. I understand that pushing for aesthetics is harmful and that there may be many capitalist, political, and similarly problematic motivations for the removal of invasive species. But I'm asking if there might really be more essential reasons for removing invasive species.
There often are, like, there's so many species that end up eating a lot of the native vegetation, especially in forests, and there's a bunch going on. But I think the person asking this question has gotten it down pat, right? Like, but again, I would say that I am also learning. I do not have a dichotomous answer. I cannot binarify it, but you really have to see the context. I love the detailed question, but I don't have a simple answer.
Okay. There is one last question. The environmentalism underpinned by lack of long-term ecological observation is the root cause for ambiguity in decision making. There was a Madurai High Court order in Tamil Nadu asking lotus flower cultivators to stop using public ponds in Kanyakumari district for their livelihood. So here lotus is not invasive species, but still it is claimed as detrimental to aquatic ecosystems. So here things to question the power imbalances between various stakeholders. It's more an observation and a comment, not really a question, but yes. Yeah. If there aren't any more questions, I'd invite Amritraj to share a little bit about the IHS library, and then Mansi to talk about BSF. But thank you so much, Nivedita. I think it's hopefully we'll all go out with like a new pair of glasses to look at things, to pause a little bit, and to understand why and how, more than arriving at how do we fix this kind of an approach. Yeah. So Amritraj, if you could introduce the IHS library team and the collaboration.
Yeah. Actually, my name is Amritraj, and I'm part of the library team at IHS. It's a very interesting session. Thank you, Nivedita. I would like to share some information about the IHS and our library. Indian Institute for Human Settlements is a national education institution committed to addressing the challenges of urbanization and sustainability in India. Established with the vision of bridging research, practice, and education, IHS aims to create equitable, sustainable, and inclusive human settlements. We offer urban fellows program, which is a scholarship-based 9-month full-time residential and an interdisciplinary program. In addition to this, it offers short-term capacity building programs, open online courses, platforms such as on Coursera, customized training for organizations, and research and practice workshops. And about our library, the IHS library was established in 2012. The currently houses a collection of 42,000 books, 1,300 films and documentaries, and more than 700 maps. We are a public reference library open to everyone. Visitors are welcome to walk in and read books at no cost. However, borrowing books requires a membership. We offer various membership plans ranging from monthly to yearly. The library also offers storytelling sessions, public library walks, and school outreach programs. And we are open from Monday to Saturday. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Mihir, Pradeep, Vinita, Mansi, and the NCBS team for their exceptional efforts in coordinating these webinars and enhancing the impact of the Urban Ecology exhibition. This is our first collaborative exhibition with the Bengaluru Sustainability Forum, and we look forward to many more such collaborations. Thank you.
Thanks, Amritraj. Mansi, would you like to introduce BSF?
Yeah, hi everyone. I would also just like to add that the library exhibition is, it has a wonderful curation of books and publications on different facets of urban ecology, and it is on till the 24th. So in case you haven't been there yet, please do go to the city campus of IIHS. Like Amrit Raj mentioned, it is free to all. Please visit. For Bengaluru Sustainability Forum, those of you who don't know about us, we are a interinstitutional initiative. We are anchored at NCBS and Azim Premji University, Science Gallery, Bengaluru, Biome, IIHS, and Wipro Foundation are our partner institutions. We basically do a couple of things. One is we curate conversations with a focus on Bangalore's sustainability. So in the thematics of biodiversity, water, waste, air, climate. And we do this via multiple ways. One of this is webinars of this kind or exhibitions, workshops. We organize retreats where we invite different stakeholders with an interdisciplinary approach to try and see how an exchange of ideas can help us come with more robust solutions for all the challenges that the city is facing. And apart from that, we also run a small grants program where we support local innovative approaches on the ground to solve for some of these challenges and problems. And I would really encourage all of you to visit our website. It's Bengaluru Sustainability Forum.org, where you will not only get a chance to see all the multiple kinds of things that we do, but also to definitely visit the small grants page, because the projects that we have supported so far will give a fantastic insight into the kind of people and organizations that are working in the city, and also the kind of problems that they are trying to solve for. So yeah, that's about BSF. Please do stay connected with us, and please visit the IIHS library and take a look at the exhibition. Thanks, Vinita.
Thank you all. Thanks again, Nivedita, and thank you, Abhishek, for all the tech help.
Thank you for the opportunity to share my work at this platform.
And to all of you who are asking about the recordings, they will be available on the BSF YouTube channel. This recording will be available in a couple of days. The previous webinars that we've had are, the recordings are on our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.